Hello, I'm Shelley Rothus, and I'm a different kind of victim. Today, we're going to be doing part 6, continued, not paused. Conditioned, normalized victimization syndrome. So, in the last video on this, I had discussed how rape culture is also domestic violence culture, as I'm changing it to. In the ending, I had discussed how those myths apply to domestic violence culture, such as, blaming the victim for even having a relationship with somebody in the first place, making assumptions based upon how they knew them, how they were associated, and whatnot, based upon the victim, and saying, when it is never somebody's fault when they are getting abused. And that's all that should be focused on. Not, just like with rape victims. Were you by yourself? What time was it? Was it at nighttime? It should never be the victim's fault as for why abuse happens to them when they don't deserve it. Period. So I'll be continuing now with part 6 of conditioned normalized victimization syndrome. This is how fear versus pride applies to both the victim or victims and the abuser or abusers. Ken chose to side with those who were intentionally trying to harm me, abuse me, because of his fear of losing his fake abusive relationships, being outnumbered and attacked by those in the cult clan, and also having to admit to himself and others that he chose to encourage and enable abusive behaviors to continue happening to someone who he delusionally believed he was being a good, humane person to. I, as the victim, feared losing one of the most sentimental things that ever happened to me. Having to risk continuing being attacked if Ken chose to be on my side. Having others see me as an unwise, foolish person. And having to admit to myself that I had foolishly ended up in another toxic relationship. I, as the victim, had the fear that Ken would get stressed or become the victim himself if anyone found out that he was friends with me. And also if he did eventually have the personal integrity to do the right ethical thing by not engaging, encouraging, or enabling the abuse that was happening to me, which would require him to be the bigger person by defending and supporting the person that is being abused, no matter who is involved. My fear was that Ken would be mad at me or even end up hating me for causing him more stress in his life. My fears were actually spot on, because as soon as the hardcore part of the abuse cycle arose, Ken did in fact blame me for getting interrogated and attacked by others involved in that abuse cycle against me. When Ken was mad, I ended up feeling guilty, hurt, angry, and very sad. I could barely look at Ken after he yelled at me and blamed me for many people private messaging him to complain, spread lies, and attack Ken for being friends with me. That's the point when I felt helpless and was ready to just give up, because I knew at that point Ken already believed the lies and was also afraid of getting attacked himself by the cult leader as a result of helping me. I knew that because shortly after that, in the private message group with me, Ken, and Madame de Citrus, Ken was already insisting that I had been lying to him about everything because the cult leader had told Ken that the lies were true and had also conjured up more lies on top of the other lies. Even the lies that I had shown Ken proof of, he was also degrading me for those as well. I myself didn't know what it felt like to have anyone actually treat me as though I am as important as they are in the relationship. Even though my relationship with Ken turned out to be the opposite of what I had thought, it did teach me what it felt like to have someone who did treat me as though I am someone who that deserves better than what I had always thought, but didn't think I was valuable enough to ever have. I did have one relationship with a man that I dated for many years, but I never was able to find it within myself to feel much during our relationship together. I honestly didn't think I deserved to have him in my life. This was due to how my abusers conditioned me to believe about myself. They always treated me as though I am nothing but a burden and stressful job for them to have in their life. So I ended up disappearing with no word because I actually thought that I was saving him from having to deal with someone who is nothing but a burden and stressful job that would end up making their life not fulfilling in positive ways. Even though my relationship with Ken was only what I saw as a level below friendship, I still focused on it in detail as for how he treated me during the relationship. Ken just happened to be the first person that I was talking to the most shortly after I had withdrawn from all the drugs that I was on due to being falsely misdiagnosed and falsely Baker acted by my abusers since before I was an adult. I had started to get my cognitive ability back slowly during the last bullying incident. So it was actually one of the biggest miracles that ever happened to me. It was during the last bullying incident that Ken was defending me against certain people, but also gave me advice in ways that ended up getting me to where I never had known to even exist. I had used his words of wisdom during that time on what I had been struggling with for a while. I was working on going through all incidents that were happening at the time to evaluate my relationship with my abusers. I was working on this with my therapist, who I shared these abuse incidents by writing out what happened in detail and sent it to her through email. Even though my relationship with Ken ended up being the most fake relationship I ever had, it still taught me the most out of all the relationships I've had in my life. During the time I was trying to escape my abusers, I had also come to learn my errors as for the relationships I had chosen throughout my life. I was using Ken mainly as my guinea pig. I had also used his words of wisdom on the relationship I had with him. I ended up learning about myself in the most painful ways. I had begun to see how many flaws there were within the relationship I had with Ken. I realized that I had a regular pattern of making excuses and exceptions for many people I've had a relationship with. So in the end, I actually learned what I want and don't want within any relationship that I choose to have in my life. Even though a good portion of me and Ken's relationship ended up being fake on his part, it still did give me the positive feelings you should have in any type of relationship that is a healthy relationship. It also taught me the feelings and red flags that I don't want and don't deserve to have in any relationship I have. Based on my learning experience with Ken, I now have more pride and courage to stand up for myself and also set limitations as for my personal boundaries with the relationships that I have in my life now. I have ended or even set higher boundaries for the relationships that I currently have or have ended due to not being treated with respect that I now know I should expect from any relationship that I choose to have in my life. I also now realize that Ken must have his swollen, deformed, bent mini-cocks stuck in the logic part of his brain, since he is a foolish, inhumane coward for encouraging, engaging, and enabling abuse happening to someone who actually respected and trusted him. During the time of trying to escape my abusers, I had started to write my personal story. I had let quite a bit of people read certain parts of my story. I still remember the first person who blurted out to me on the phone, "Oh, you like him!" This was after reading my personal story and asking me questions about it. I remember being confused and wondering why she would think that. I also was confused as to why someone would think that I would even think that, someone would think that I would even think that me and Ken would ever be in a relationship like that. So I started to ask other friends that I knew as for what their thoughts were based upon things that I have written and also the gifts that I had sent to Ken as a way to thank him for what he did do for me. Most people said that a man would definitely think that I was trying to let him know that I wanted more than a friendship. I actually became very anxious and nervous because I was afraid that it was true and Ken was also thinking the same thing. Considering what I knew about Ken personally, I knew that if he did think that I was expecting or wanting more than a friendship, he would respond in ways that would be very hurtful to me, because I knew that he is a very closed off type of person as for any type of relationship that would involve a large amount of trust within it. I also was afraid because I didn't want to deal with any more hurt during the time that was extremely hard for me to get through. At first, I thought Ken knew me well enough to know that I am different than most others as for how I personally feel most comfortable expressing myself to others. Also, my own personal way that I express myself the most effective way, which happens to be through writing. I did become nervous and worried that Ken was feeling scared by taking my gifts in the way I honestly didn't think he would. I realized this when he didn't even let me know that he got my gift or letters. I honestly didn't realize how rude and cruel it is for anyone to not even acknowledge getting a gift from another person. This is because my own father rarely thanked me or showed any appreciation for the gifts I had gotten him. I became even more certain when Ken had started to softly ghost me. Even though he had slowly started to do that after the last bullying incident, he started to do it more frequently and also started to barely say anything the few times that he did respond to my private messages to him. Even though I felt very hurt by Ken not at least responding to what I had written to him, I was so used to being treated this way. I had written my feelings to my 3 abusers several times, only to end up getting shamed or punished for sharing my feelings with them. So when Ken did it, I figured that since I accepted and tolerated the same treatment from my 3 abusers, it wouldn't be fair to expect anything different from others that aren't what society believes should have certain expectations attached to them based upon a person's role in another person's life. So of course, me and Ken were not in a relationship as for, an intimate partnership or whatever. So, the expectations, it's okay to abuse somebody if you're not in that, situation. Or, you know, if you give somebody a gift, and you're not in a intimate partnership and they're just a friend or somebody else, then, no need to thank them, who cares, be rude and, you know, careless like that, and heartless. I still remember, you know, telling it was quite embarrassing because, when I told people, about the gifts, or just a few people, and they're like, he didn't say thank you, and I didn't even think of it. I was like, no. I honestly, I was like, what? They're like, he didn't even say thank you. I was like, oh. I was like, because that's just how I was, like, I just showed. I didn't get that from my abusers. I didn't get appreciation or anything like that. So I was actually, that was very hard because that was very embarrassing, and I didn't even want to admit that. And then I just kind of, again, making excuses and exceptions. I thought, well, maybe it's a guy thing, I tried to make it out like that, except even my friend Nina was like, so I needed to hear it from another guy. I really wish that John Paul had a different answer. It was really hard, and I felt really embarrassed asking. I asked him, is it a guy thing not to thank somebody for a gift that you received from a friend? I still remember that night in PM, and he was like, what? Are you kidding me? He's like, no, that's not a guy thing, that people don't say thank you for a gift or anything like that. I was like, oh, boy, did I feel dumb. I just felt like just burying my head in the ground, even though I know deep down inside that was very rude and unkind, of him to do. But I guess I just, like I said, the conditioned, normalized victimization syndrome. I didn't want to deal with that hurt, thinking about it now, it's like, even, like I said, the victim feels that themselves. I feel really dumb and stupid, based upon that. And I did fear when people were saying stuff, like, oh, that means, he's going to think you like him. I was like, oh, shit, that's the first thing I thought. I said, then I thought to myself, I'm thinking, well, I've known him long enough, and he knows me, and he knows that I'm being honest with him, that I've been honest with him, that he knows how I am. I guess not, because he ended up going along with the recent bullying hate group and going along with everything they were saying. Something about, like I've been showing is that I thought we were going to get married, or I have no idea. And then, even during the time I was trying to escape my abusers, let's just say that intimate partnership was in the way back. That's something that I don't even want now, not for a very long time. That's a way in the, it was funny, because even a friend, was like, asking me if I had met anybody yet. It's like, I got a lot to work on within myself before I am even ready for that type of relationship. And it's even more so worse now after the recent bullying incident, even though the relationship with me and Ken was not intimate partnership, it still traumatized me to where I honestly I don't have no desire for any type of really close relationship. And I also have issues with, physical touch and stuff like that. It just makes me very uncomfortable and anxious. As my friend explained it, she has similar issues. It's basically complex PTSD, and between that and my anxiety and panic disorder, it's, it all mushes together, and it's not fun to deal with. It's not something I planned, but that's just how I got traumatized from it. It wasn't until I finally had the courage to shamefully ask my friend John Paul a question based upon men in general. This didn't happen until after I escaped my abusers and shortly before the recent bullying incident. I asked him if it was a guy thing to not thank someone for a gift that they got from my friend. John Paul was actually shocked that I had to ask that question in the first place, because I guess it is a well-known thing to show appreciation when someone gives you a gift. I felt extremely stupid, hurt, ashamed, embarrassed, and angry, mainly at myself. Even though I never expected to have more than a below-level friendship with Ken during the time I was trying to escape my abusers, I actually just went along with others thinking about it that way. I honestly, during that time, rather have people think that I was expecting to have an intimate relationship with Ken instead of judging me or criticizing me for staying friends with Ken after what he had done to me. I myself was already ashamed and embarrassed that I continued a relationship with someone who had done things that should never be accepted within a healthy relationship. I certainly didn't need anyone else to rub it into my face. And it's the truth. When people started, automatically thinking that, like I said, a lot of people, they see a female with a male, or if they talk to them, for a long time, that it must be going on to the next level. I honestly went along with it. I went along with people just thinking that, because I gave them a gift or this or that. It was a hell of a lot easier to just having them think that than me having to admit that I ended up in another toxic relationship. And I'm still ashamed of that. I mean, I honestly am. It's very hard to, say, but, I just, stated again with, talking to John Paul and asking him if that was a guy thing. I actually was hoping he would say it was, but I guess not. That was extremely embarrassing, even though John Paul's my friend and so is the other person that was around when I asked that question. I'm still extremely embarrassed and ashamed. Due to the fear of the consequences that the victim's abuser or abusers caused them to have, the victim's responses to protect themselves ends up making them feel helpless as to where they don't even know what it means to have pride. In my case, I was raised by my 3 abusers and didn't know what a healthy relationship actually was. I actually believed almost all the lies that my abusers raised me to believe about myself. Due to my abusers manipulating others to believe their lies about me enabled them to continue to be successful at maintaining power and control over me. As I have just proven, conditioned normalized victimization syndrome is in fact a part of the cycle of abuse. Also, it shows how both the victim and abuser both experience fear versus pride within the cycle of abuse. The victim learns how to protect themselves from extreme emotional pain by using responses or behaviors when they are being abused by another person. Continuous use of these responses or behaviors become habitual and used in all their relationships outside the relationship that they have with their abuser or abusers. The victim eventually normalizes their responses or behaviors as what they actually believe is a normal response or behavior that is what happens within a healthy relationship. So that will be the ending of part 6. And we'll go over that again in the next part 6 continued. And that will be a new section that I have done. And that is known as conditioned, normalized assholism syndrome. Fear versus pride. That will be the add-on. Yes, I'm a writer. I love to add on because that's how I do it. I can keep on going and build up more ideas as to what I actually want. So, part 6 continued. I hope to see you next time. I'm Shelley Rothus, and I'm a different kind of victim. See you next time.